All right. Good afternoon, evening, morning, or night, ladies and gentlemen. Today I am joined by a very special guest, one Mr. CyanYoh. Cyan, could you please introduce yourself?
Well, I guess I'm special then. Hi, I'm CyanYoh. I primarily do graphics and video editing for a lot of people within the Fire Emblem community. Been around here a while. I stream games on Twitch, and I have a YouTube channel that has thus been dormant for about a year. As well, I mean, I've primarily been assistant to other content creators in the scene.
Now, I wasn't intending on asking this, but upon giving it some thought, CyanYoh that's a pretty unique name. Do you have any story about how you came up with that name?
Yeah, it's not that particularly interesting, but my usernames have tended to be like color plus Nintendo item, like going back since I was a kid, some like early 2000s. Eventually, I think it was during either the Wii or the Wii U era, my Nintendo ID was like the Cyan Yoshi, and after a while, I realized, yeah, the Cyan Yoshi doesn't really roll off the tongue, and you're also always connected to that Nintendo property. So just chop up the front, chop off the back, and CyanYoh.
Oh, really? I would have never guessed
Yep.
that Yo used to be Yoshi. Um,
Yeah.
how did you first get into the Fire Emblem community?
Well, Fire Emblem, I guess it'd be easier to start with how I got into Fire Emblem itself, and that was honestly purely happenstance. I had played Melee as a child, and, I'd been introduced to Marth and Roy through that, but I had no idea what Fire Emblem was, or even that they were from Fire Emblem. The only indication I had was that the temple theme was called, like, Together We Ride was called Fire Emblem in Melee. And it just so happened one Christmas, my dad ended up, I guess he saw the game box art of FE7, which, if you don't know, it's like Elwood's front and center, big honkin' Durandal in the front, and he knew I liked Legend of Zelda. Legend of Zelda, what's it about? Anime boy in tights with a big sword. This game, anime boy in tights, big sword. My dad said, kid'll probably like this. And
Yeah.
he was right. FE community, however, it's something of a weird thing. The first foray I ever made into the FE community was, I guess, the same way a lot of people who have been around as long as I have made it into the community was through Serenus Forest, the OG Fire Emblem forum, so to speak. It was mostly, I didn't do much in the way of discussion about games. I was just kind of like, in all, reading about people who understood the mechanics better than I did. But the FE ROM hacking community was something that really interested me. Back when I was introduced to it, I believe, God, what was the big? I think it was actually during the Last Promises development. I think that was the big buzz around when I was contributing air quotes here. I had nothing of value to say, but that's when I first kind of started recognizing people in the community and trying to get acquainted with that.
Yeah, wasn't.
From that,
Oh, sorry. I
please
didn't
go
mean
on.
to cut you off. You can go ahead.
No, please.
Okay,
I guess
I was just gonna remark. Wasn't The Last Promise? Didn't that start development like back in 2010, 2011?
I want to say it started development before 2010.
Oh, wow.
I don't quote me on this, but certainly I think it was like starting late 2008 or early 2009. It was I want to say it was like a 2 or so year development process.
Didn't it have
I
a
mean,
different name back then as well? I can't remember what it was off the top of my head.
if it did, it escapes me.
All right. Well, sorry. I didn't mean to go on a tangent. You can go ahead.
No, please. Beyond that, I guess YouTube was another way I was introduced to like FE content creators. Mage Knight 404 was doing his hacks to Sacred Dawn, I believe playthroughs of FE7 and FE8 and FE10 were some of the first things I ever watched on YouTube. Marky Joe's Rage Fests were always like a joy to watch every year. I mean, these are old hats in the Fire Emblem community.
Yeah.
Some of which are kind of like, I'm not gonna say rode off into the sunset, but have kind of like pivoted to doing other things primarily, or maybe pivoted over to Twitch. And I guess from there, it's just kind of, I stuck around long enough for things like, I don't know, Fire Emblem Reddit to pop up or other content creators on YouTube, and I just stuck around ever since.
Yeah. My experience was sort of the same. I'm probably a bit younger than you, so I played Brawl as my first Smash game, and I saw Ike. I really liked him, and I saw him on some box art at like a Target or something. So that's how I saw the name Fire Emblem, and then I later bought FE11 as my first game.
Oh, nice. Dang, it's a shame. Had you gotten FE9, you probably would have had a good retirement plan if you sold it.
I actually stole a copy from my friend, but we don't talk about that.
Yeah, that's what reclassing's for.
Yeah. Anyways, so you said you mostly work as a designer. How did you first get into, or rather, I guess first, how did you know you wanted to do something like that?
Funnily enough, I guess my introduction, well, when I was first introduced to the concept of doing any sort of graphical work regarding Fire Emblem was old Let's Plays. People like Chugga Conroy, who during his Pokemon Let's Plays would occasionally cut to info cards of Pokemon, their stats, the moves, things of that nature. I mentioned Mage Knight 404 before, but during his early Let's Plays of, I want to say like Radiant Dawn, or maybe even some of his hacks, he would have just like a rough little sidebar of like, hey, here are like or like character growths, or like their supports, their affinities, things of that nature. And I must have been late middle or early high school. I mean, for context, I'm 24, so I'm not super old, but I'm certainly not young comparatively speaking. So I thought that was really cool. Like Chugga Conroy I mean, he's still going strong to this day, but he was like the standard of presentation that I thought was, I thought everyone should try and mirror. So I probably have like old sketchbooks of like, even before I thought of doing this for Fire Emblem, of like prefab character growth sheets and things of that nature.
Interesting.
As far as actually doing this practically, honestly, I sort of just fell into it. I guess for those of you who don't know, like I was primarily doing work for Mangs. I started officially in October of 2018. It just so happened that I was just scrolling through. I don't even think I was subscribed to him. I would see his videos every now and again. He was a big content creator. And I was scrolling through YouTube, and in its infinite wisdom, I want to say showed a... God, did they have community posts back in 2018?
I don't think so. I feel like that was a 2019 thing, but maybe they did. I can't say
Maybe it
for
was
sure.
late 2018, but it was either a video or somehow I saw that like he was posting that, hey, like I'd like to hire someone to do like thumbnails or other graphics for my videos. And I'd never done this in any like official capacity. I'd worked as a software trainer in college, and like I got a degree in computer graphics and programming, so like I suppose to some degree I have some backing to do what I do, but it's something of an imposter syndrome. I look at that, I'm like, yeah, no, there are people way better than me that can do this. Like I wouldn't stand a chance. And at risk of, I don't want to sound mean, but like midway through his like application period, he posted some of the thumbnails people had sent him, like for examples. And I'm like, huh, you know what? Screw it. I could do this.
Yeah.
I could do this. And I threw in a thumbnail. I want to say that you can probably still check on his channel. I think the first thumbnail I used as like a test for him was why Cecilia is good in general, and a few things that I had done for... I didn't even realize it, but looking back, I'd actually been in contact with Gast like years earlier, like early in college. I think my first contact with him was, I think he was having trouble with like a web programming assignment,
wow.
And I think I just ended up doing this. I think I ended up just doing it for him,
funny.
but I guess he went to bat for me, saying like, oh yeah, no, this guy's pretty nice and his thumbnails are good, and I got the gig.
Wow. Yeah, that's how much I think I've heard you mention this before, but you said doing design like that actually pays pretty well, doesn't it?
I mean, it's for the amount of effort I put into it, or I guess that doesn't sound particular, right? But it depends. It depends on the size of who you're working for. It depends on how quickly you can put it out, how many avenues you can like
of course.
push your stuff towards. But I mean, again, Mangs is my like primary employer, and he would post every day, every other day. He'd ask me for thumbnail templates for long-running Let's Plays, one-off thumbnails, inserts. Eventually that evolved into me doing, well, I overtook most of the editing for him. I automated most of his Let's Play things, so it adds up over time, and I think at its peak I was able to pay my bills doing it, which, for a college student who was doing this as his side gig while like having a job and going to classes, I was happy with it. I mean, the fact is I love Fire Emblem and I do enjoy making stuff for the scene. That I could get paid any amount for doing it was honestly, it was good enough for me.
Yeah. I don't want to get into a whole controversial side conversation about Mengs, but how would you say he was as a boss?
Well, I mean, there's obviously, given current situations, you can't really avoid talking about it. It would be weird if we sidestepped it. Putting aside how he may have acted with other people, things brought against him, as a boss, honestly, he was surprisingly organized. He was a really good boss. I was not subscribed to him when I like applied to be his designer. And I kind of got a vibe from his videos that he was kind of just a shit poster to a degree. I didn't expect much in the way of organization in the back end. I kind of expected this to be kind of, we'll play everything by ear, but no, he was really organized as a boss. He was pretty clear on what he wanted, and he was pretty reasonable on expectations of delivery. I know there are people who will say bad words about him for other things that he's done, and he very well may warrant them, but as a boss, I don't have too many bad things to say about him. I enjoyed my time working with him. He was a reasonable employer.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think that's a side of him most people got to see on YouTube, so that is interesting to hear about. All right, so you said you started playing through Fire Emblem games with FE7. What would you say is your favorite game that you've played, though?
That's always the question, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I can probably, it would probably be a toss-up between FE7 and FE10. I think FE7 lives very hard on it being my first game, and while I was involved in the hacking scene, or at least following it, the golden child for hacking. Now it's moved on to FE8, but I got to see what the engine of FE7 could really be pushed to do, and I appreciate it. It is a game whose mechanics I understand very well. FE10 is just, I love the game. The word is thrown around quite a bit, but I think it is one of the few Fire Emblem games that could probably lay claim to, like, the descriptor of epic. It is a large-scale war building very, very cleverly off of FE9, which is a great game in its own right. I think it's probably the best well-rounded game, but how FE10 was able to build off of FE9 was, at the time, I thought it was, like, the coolest thing in the world. I remember seeing the E3 trailer for FE10. It was like a 7-second teaser posted on IGN. And all it was, if you remember the opening to Radiant Dawn, the last little bit is like Micaiah and Soth standing in this nondescript, like, cheery, dreamlike field. And it pans into Micaiah, and then it, like, zooms out, and then you see Soth. Well, we know it's Soth now, but back in the day, like, wait a second. Is that tiny kid from Path of Radiance?
Yeah.
Like, why is he buff? Like, why is he hot? What happened?
I think it's a reaction
What's this gonna be
most
about?
people have when going from one game to the next.
Yeah, but I enjoy Radiant Dawn. I think it has a lot of replay value. I think it has I think its gameplay holds up. I think its main scenarios, barring a few hiccups, like, pretty tight. Really, the only complaint I have about it is its support system, which is disappointing, but I guess something of a concession they had to make for a cast that large.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's good that they had a system like the base conversation so that characters could still get some, like, characterization, although
I agree.
it still made you feel as though some of the newer characters that they introduced in Radiant Dawn didn't get enough. But yeah, overall.
Exactly. Yeah.
Overall,
I mean, it was a step back from Path of Radiance in that regard.
Yeah, Path of Radiance, in my opinion, has some of the best, like, support writing in the series.
It is the golden standard for how I think characters should interact. I mean, you can tweak it around. Echoes has played with a formula of, like, quote-unquote base conversations, as has Three Houses with talking to students in Garrick Mach. But I do still think that FE9 has done it the best by virtue of having a varied cast that talks to one another. Three Houses always focuses conversations to involve Byleth, and echoes. The conversations do always involve Alm or Celica, and they're rather short. I'm not talking about memory prisms, mind you, just the villager blurbs where they talk about what's going on in the story.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting that one of your favorites is FE7. It's definitely a game that I think has sort of fallen from grace in the community. A lot of people like to rag on it, but...
I understand it. I mean, FE7 was the golden child for the longest time. I mean, FE8 was ragged on for being incredibly disappointing from a gameplay perspective. It was super easy. It had very little world building. It was just sort of yeah, it's all right. There wasn't a lot to it. It was fine, but I don't think at the time, back in mid to late 2000s, it really was regarded as highly as FE7. And maybe that is because at the time, a lot of the discussion I was involved in with FE7 was centered around like what we can do with GBA Fire Emblem games in regards to hacking. And FE8 at the time was impenetrable. Impenetrable? It was a tough nut to crack. No one could really hack it. I want to say Ray did a Sacred Dawn, and like I think he was fighting the game the entire way. There weren't the tools that we have available now.
Yeah, it's crazy how far ROM hacking has come for the GBA. I mean, nowadays we have like ways to implement skills into FE8, which is just crazy.
It's nuts, but going back to FE7, how it's kind of fallen from grace, FE7's main scenario is one of its weaker points. It never delves, at least for me, I can't speak for everyone, it never delves to the point of being insultingly bad, or like to the point where I can't just like shrug my shoulders and go, okay. The scenario is really just a way to connect character beats to character beats. And I think FE7, it has one of the stronger casts, and it has some of the stronger theming in the series. And I think that's what's kept it afloat, even post Mecha ripping into it. It is a game that I think is larger than the sum of it's greater than the sum of its parts by virtue of the characters, their interactions, and again, a lot of the theming that goes into it. FE7's a story about loss, and about a good chunk of the cast in their supports at least touches on it. And I don't agree that the theming was done super well by way of their main villain Nurgle, because of translation errors, because of the wonky guide requirements, but it's something that I personally get a lot out of. I enjoy theming and characterizations. I enjoy character-focused, character-driven games. That's probably why I don't have the nicest things to say about something like FE4, which is more scenario-driven than it is character-driven, just largely by virtue of it being on the console it was on.
Yeah.
But it's a case of different strokes for different folks. If what you value about Fire Emblem is characters and theming, you very well might like FE7. If you're someone who really likes epic tales, like if you're someone who enjoys stories that are driven by the scenario, you might prefer something like FE6 or FE4.
Yeah, I definitely can agree with that. I think FE7, yeah, I agree. The story can be a bit weak at times, but it's never to the point of some of Conquest's weaker parts of its story.
Yeah, I suppose we have something to thank with. I don't think a lot of Fire Emblem stories were really brought under super heavy scrutiny until the boom of the 3DS era, when just a bunch of people were introduced to the community for the first time. I remember seeing a lot of people rip into like, the Volmark of Awakening has no reason to exist. And, they're right. And then there was the whole, like, Fate's bad for, like, 2 years. Where you couldn't turn a corner without seeing a write-up on why Fate's story has, like, killed my parents and, like, tortured my dog.
Yeah. I mean, Fate's story definitely gets ragged on a lot for being, like, the worst thing ever. It's not the worst thing ever, but it does get very weird in how bad it is at times.
I mean, it's not good.
Yeah.
Fate's story is... I would say Fates is a game whose main scenario very often dips into what I will call insultingly bad. I've never groaned at any other Fire Emblem game, like not even some of like the weirder ass pulls of Three Houses, but there were points in Fates, and I wanted to love Fates. I was so very excited for Fates, but there were points in that game where I just had to put my 3DS down and audibly groan.
Yeah, I was pretty young at the time it came out, so I didn't really notice how insultingly bad it was at first, but as I grew older and saw a bunch of people pointing it out, I was like, okay, yeah.
And no, that's okay. I mean, I was young when I played FE7. I would have been, God, what is it? 2003, 2001? I would have been like, younger than 10. So I didn't have a lot of experience scrutinizing stories. Like, it was good enough for me.
Yeah.
And by the time Fates came out, I had quite a swath of literature and like stories under my belt that I could kind of use as grounding for, wow, this this story's not great when it came to Fates. But like, that's okay. If you get something out of Fates, more power to you. Media is meant to be meaningful, and if a story of Fates, if a character of Fates, if they're meaningful for you, great. Like, I'm happy for you that the story did its job for you, and that's great.
Yeah, you talked about how FE8 has pretty weak and almost non-existent world building, and I feel like Fates also suffers from the same issue. It's like there are these few countries, the world doesn't have a name, and they just kind of exist.
Mm-hmm. It's FE8, I think, suffers from the fact that it's limited by the GBA support system, which is not a good support system.
Yeah, it leads to
Fates is at least supplanted with the post new mystery support system, where there's just a bunch of character interaction that could supplant any lacking in like world building or main scenario.
Okay, so who would you say is your favorite character in the Fire Emblem franchise?
I mean, it's an easy answer, and it's probably if you've talked to me for more than like 30 minutes about Fire Emblem, it's obvious. Like, my favorite character is Lyn. Like, first character you see in FE7, the whole like Last of the Lorca, not belonging in Kalen, not belonging in Sakai. It was something that was meaningful to me as a child. Like, I'm mixed race, and while I didn't exactly, my life wasn't super hard. There were challenges I faced growing up where I couldn't really understand why certain parts of my family weren't exactly super receptive to me. I didn't feel like I fit in either part of my like heritage. And Lyn was the first character that I had seen that kind of like addressed that or had a story that was revolving around that. And I realize now that like the whole, like the Princess of Two Worlds is something of like a common trope or cliche, but Lyn was the first character that I was introduced to that kind of touched on that, and I don't know, it stuck. It was meaningful to me.
Yeah.
That aside, crit animations, 10 out of 10.
Oh yes.
They're very good. Like, aesthetically speaking, I really like crit animations for Lyn, and that's like super shallow, but really cool.
Yeah, I mean, style is all that matters. But yeah, that is a specific type of character that, I mean, even in FE6, there's a character like that, Rutger. He's mixed race, and because of that, all of the people belonging to his tribe gets massacred, except for him, just because the burn part of his blood is enough for him to look more like a burn person than a Sakaean.
Rutger and Lyn, honestly, I would argue that Rutger does Lyn's character arc just better. I have complained about how Lyn's character arc concludes several times. It is just a worse Rutger. For those of you who don't know, Rutger's like character arc is kind of capped off with his support of Deke, where Deke kills one person from, I guess, the burn company that slaughtered his tribe, and Rutger gets like, understandably angry. That's his fight. But the difference, well, I guess I can't really say a difference yet since I haven't explained Lyn's, but Deke says like, okay, yeah, I'm sorry, that's not my fight to fight for you. It's kind of presumptuous of me, but like, don't get lost in revenge. It's not something you want to walk alone, and I'll help you do whatever you choose. And Rutger gets agency in what he gets to choose. Lyn, however, Lyn mode is 10 chapters long in a prologue. I want to say 1, 2,
It's technically
3, 4,
12 chapters long if we include the
5.
prologue and 7X.
Oh, that's true. I forgot about the guide. A good chunk of Lyn mode is meant to establish that, like, hey, there are bandits here, And like, yeah, they're bad. Yeah, they wanted to sell like Lynn's best friend into presumably sexual slavery, but like, come on, they're not as bad as the Taliver. Like, come on, they have standards. They're not gonna murder women and children. And you spend quite a few chapters building that up, only to, in a support with a missable character that joins very late, with a character who has very quick support growth with like the other two lords and Florina, that like, yeah, I just kind of murdered the Taliver off screen, and I'm gonna give you one text box to respond to that, where we're just gonna let you like go ... but, and that's it. I hate the Wallace Lynn support. I think it absolutely assassinates what headway for a character arc they made for her. It is my least favorite support in the series. I think it is awful.
I haven't really. Something I should do is read more supports, but I feel like I haven't played FE7 a ton, so I haven't really had a chance to read as much as I'd like. But yeah, that does sound not amazing.
It's not. Lynn Wallace A. Like, as a single support, it is my pick for the worst in the series. I'm sure you could probably make the argument that there are worse support chains in something like Conquest or Revelation, but as far as like an isolated conversation and what damage it does, it is dead to me. And I also I do not recommend you try and like grind out supports in GBA. I did that as a kid. It took fucking forever. Just read it online.
Yeah, I just read them online for what I'm interested in. And yeah, I think it's very interesting how FE6 has like such interesting supports, and yet in game they're just so tedious and awful to get.
I mean, that's true for really all of them. I think it got better as it went along. The requirements became a little less strict, but outside of certain characters with like very low either high gross or like high bases for their support points, you're not gonna see a support through to A unless you really try for it.
Yeah, especially because of the you can only gain like 50 support points between all characters. They all share from that pool, and once 50 points have been gained, you can't gain any more for that map. I always found that to be really dumb.
I did not know that, actually. I didn't realize that the system was like that for FE6.
Yeah, it is. It's really stupid, but...
Wow, that is... God, that is bad. Okay, well, hey, FE7 did one thing right.
Yeah. Well, anyways, I can't think of anything else I'd like to ask. Is there anything you'd like to say as a sort of closing remark?
I can't really think of anything in particular. I'm honestly flattered that you thought I'd be someone interesting enough to talk to on whatever this is. Admittedly, I don't know what you're planning on doing with this, but hello, audience that may be watching.
It's just, yeah, I plan on posting it to my YouTube. It's just an interview thing. I wanted to experiment with something like this. I thought it might be something I enjoy. But, yeah, thank you for...
I had fun with it.
Thank you for taking the time out of your day for something like this.
No, thank you for having me. It's been an honor.
All right. Well, see ya, guys.
Keep it groovy.